You're listening to a production of WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming on demand. All right. So here's your bottom line up front for Fire Away, episode 59. Back in 10 October of 2019, I had the honor and privilege of talking with one of the few, the proud, of all Catholic men, none other than Pierce, a.k.a. at Catholic Guardians. So if you need a shot of authentic Catholic masculinity or know someone who does, be sure to tune in.
What is your profession? Saddle up. Lock and load.
Domine Patri et Filii, Spiritus Sancti.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. You're listening to Fire Away with Carlos Bersabe, brought to you by Catholic Ammo, En Route Books and Media, and WCAT Radio, where we're locked, loaded, and ready for battle with today's hot topics. Howdy, everybody. This is your host, Carlos Bersabe. You're listening to episode 59 of Fire Away. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe via iTunes or whatever platform you are using and give us a great rating and review. It is truly appreciated and helps a lot. So let's do a quick recap. I have not done a very good job of being a very good friend and a podcaster because this has been sitting in my queue for quite some time, since October, in fact. So if you would like to listen to the previous podcast, if you haven't already, it was a wonderful podcast with Elise Arellano from Instagram's at That Catholic Design, where we talked about healing and forgiveness. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Not saying that healing and forgiveness isn't going to be a topic, but like I said, I've been remiss. So today you are going to hear my episode 59, but Pierce's episode 30. So if you don't know who Pierce is, I don't know what you've been doing with your life. Go over to CatholicGuardians.com, be sure to subscribe, give him a great rating and review as well. And in his episode 30, we talked about how to raise Catholic kids. And so without further ado, I'm going to provide you the audio from our conversation back in October of 2019. Enjoy.
All right. Welcome to Catholic Guardians, an unapologetically masculine podcast for Catholic men by Catholic men. And together we are going to return to tradition. So tonight, in a very special guest episode, we have Carlos from Catholic Ammo stopping by, and he and I are going to discuss mainly, we're going to talk about kids. We got kids. How many do you have?
I have 4.
You got 4. That's beautiful, man. I only have 3 so far. So we're going to talk about raising kids, raising Catholic kids in a secular world, some of the issues that arise from that, and then we can kind of just go from there. We don't have too much of a specific platform planned for tonight, but I find some of my best conversations are kind of like that anyway. So do you want to open us up in some prayer, and then we can kick it off?
Right on. Let's do the St. Michael prayer. That's one of my favorite prayers. In the name of the Father, amen. And the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, Prince of heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast in hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Father and Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right, so you got 4. Didn't you just have a baby not too long ago?
Yeah, he's 6 months old now. He's been crawling, and he is probably going to be the biggest kid unless God blesses us with more kids. Because right now, his growth trajectory, he might be the linebacker that I've been waiting for.
It's so funny, man. My middle child, so my middle kid, my daughter, she's 3, almost. She's like 3.5, something around there. And my youngest one is 23 months, so she's almost 4 or almost 2. They are exactly the same height and about half a pound away from each other. And it's always so funny because everybody thinks that they're twins when we go out. And it's like there's a good chunk of distance in between them. And then my son, he's huge. I mean, he's like 99th percentile for everything. So I've got a really, really tall baby, I've got a really, really small baby, and then a really, really big one. So I just can't seem to get somebody to be average. Like my two daughters are in the same size clothing right now, and they're a good year and a half apart. So it's an interesting stretch.
Right on. I like with my kids, my daughter, she's 11 years old. She's starting to become the little lady. And so I posted the other day, if not yesterday, about her going with her Catholic school, doing this outdoors thing to where they were camping and whatnot. And I missed her, and I was thinking about it, how much she's grown. I was looking at her old baby pictures, all the different things. And now she's almost as tall as my wife, and it's scary how time flies. And then my second child, he's 7 years old, and he's slowly outgrowing his gi. As I was telling you, we were going to martial arts, and I'm looking at their gis, and it looks like I need to buy new ones for them. Otherwise, it looks like they're going to go farm in the rice fields, and so. It's not going to be a very good look. They're getting ready for a tournament, and so I might have to invest in that. And then my second to youngest, he's the one I think who will be most like me physically as a kid, and probably, hopefully, he doesn't get to be as round as me as an adult with numerous injuries aiding and abetting that. But he is just built like a spider monkey. I mean, this kid is just he's going to be probably a rock climber. I don't know. He loves doing those kind of things. And then, like I said, my youngest, not that I want my kid to be a linebacker per se, but I think it'd be interesting if one of my kids played football. Are you a football fan?
I used to be. I had a buddy get KIA'd in an IED attack.
I'm sorry.
On his first deployment. And like the weekend that it happened, so like he ended up passing away. They flew him back to town. We did the whole funeral service for him. And then that weekend, everybody wanted to get together. And the funeral service was kind of lackluster. Like not a lot of people showed up from his high school. His parents were there, and they were really super inappropriate. So the death benefits that the family receives is actually quite substantial. And these parents were just acting like they had just hit the lottery. Oh, man. And we all thought it was super disrespectful. And so like that Sunday football, game's on, and it was like drizzling. And like the players all had like these jackets on. And I remember like the announcer got up and he was like, "Look at these heroes, these American heroes playing through the rain." And it kind of hit me that we really hold up on a pedestal some of the most inverted people ever.
Right.
And that was kind of like the end of me wanting to be part of like major league sports, because I always saw everybody putting so much weight behind the words and actions of people who are just playing a game, when we really kind of discount and ignore the people who are the actual heroes in our society. So I don't do football. That's a long story short, which is kind of a downer, but
no, it's all right. Yeah, everybody has their thing, and I can certainly appreciate that. I was on the Catholic radio this morning, Spirit Catholic Radio. If you're ever in Nebraska, that's the Catholic radio station for pretty much the entire state. And they do a thing called the Good Book Club. And so they asked me to come on and offer some thoughts on it. And it was on Mark chapter 12, verse, I want to say it's a little further, like 30 onward, all the way to chapter 13 to verse 9. But basically it was the one on the widow's mite, the widow's contribution to the treasury. And and as I was preparing for it, I was thinking of Saint Therese and of Lisieux, which today is her feast day, and it struck me that just like what you were saying, that here Jesus is lauding this poor widow, not just a widow, but a poor widow who contributed, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what these other wealthy people did. But he's singling her out and praising her for pretty much donating her entire life, that self-donation of self, or self-donation of life, I think was very laudable. And just like what you're saying, we have these people that we celebrate, aka celebrities, and it's very tough to be able to put in perspective nowadays who is somebody. Like we just like what you were saying earlier, put people up on pedestals. What does it mean to be somebody? Well, to Jesus, this poor widow was certainly a somebody. And with Saint Therese, she says that, like the little flower in the forest doesn't seem as great as the mighty oaks, but God shines on the little flowers nonetheless. And so it's a very interesting thing. For me, on the other hand, I'm wearing my Christian McCaffrey jersey, and for the most part, it's not because like I hold them in such great esteem as people to be admired, but rather I use the term entertainment a lot. Like people entertain me, and sports has a very interesting way of developing character that I think, if we focus on that aspect of it, it's actually good lessons learned. Like, say, for example, the Falcons were playing the Patriots. Boo for both teams. I'm a Carolina Panthers fan. But as I was watching this game, I was deployed, and I woke up, I turned on the radio, and I heard it over AFN, and because I didn't have a TV, but they still played it on the base radio, and I want to say the Falcons in the end of the third quarter were still up by like 20 points, and I was thinking, all right, this game's over. I'm gonna go in, clock in for my shift. So I go in for my shift, and by the time I get there on the TV, because we had the TV in my workspace, the Patriots had come back and won the Super Bowl. And I'm thinking to myself, these people should have been down and out. But you have folks who weren't willing to give up, no matter how slim the odds were. Like if you look on ESPN at that time, probably the win probability for the Falcons would have been at 98% by the time the middle of the fourth quarter was. And then all of a sudden, through grit and through will and through sheer tenacity, people were able to claw themselves out of this deficit, out of this hole, and this physical exertion was able to get them across literally the goal line. And I think those are the kind of things that are great lessons to be learned. A strategy for sure, all kinds of good stuff. But in going to today's topic, I think that's where we as parents have to help our kids draw that line. Like they can't want to be
that guy,
or like Antonio Brown or Miley Cyrus or any of these folks that people celebrate. It's okay to look at their lives and kind of chuckle at them, but chuckle in a hey, don't be that guy kind of way.
Yeah.
Because I think what's important, or what should come back, it's the small T tradition, but it's a really good one, is the saint cards. Little kids back in the day used to collect saint cards.
Trade them like like basketball cards.
Yeah, and I think that'd be a really great thing. And like I don't know if Baratus out there, if you get to listen to this, what if you made like baseball versions of saint cards?
That'd be so cool. It was really sad. So we have here in our diocese, we're a fairly left diocese, and the last holdout was we had an order of Franciscans that were kind of like headquartered out of our cathedral, and they used to keep that building stocked with prayer cards. And I mean, like, not like the Honda Civic of prayer cards, like I'm talking like Bentley, like gold all over it. They were laminated. They were like heavy. They were super cool. And then when they left, the prayer cards left. And you know, it's really funny. A lot of people kind of started noticing that, like the prayer cards had kind of disappeared. And, you know, my wife and I and our kids, we went on like a search through our town for a parish that would feed our family, in essence, spiritually. And we ended up settling on, we've got 2 parishes that we call home right now. One of them is a Latin Mass mission, and the other one is a Novus Ordo parish. And, you know, I think it was interesting when we went to the Novus Ordo parish, the Knights of Columbus had a variation of those prayer cards. Mm-hmm. And they were like, I mean, like giving it out like it was free candy to kids. And it was the coolest thing that I'd seen. And it really made me, it's that. So I talk about this a lot when it comes to how parents deal with kids in church. Like kids don't really remember what you said to them at Mass or what the priest said at Mass, but kids definitely remember how they felt in Mass. And when we walked in and I saw the knights like handing out those prayer cards, I felt home. And so that's one of the reasons that we actually go to that Novus Ordo parish, because I can't stand the Novus Ordo Mass in our town. But there's a good priest there, and he does his level best to kind of keep the wonky business to a minimum. And then we've got some on fire Knights of Columbus there. So, you know, I really wish that we had something like that we could help like promote. Like the people that we want our kids to grow up to be like are not celebrities. They're not musicians. They're not, you know, professional athletes. They're like saints. Like, so exactly to what we were talking about today. My wife and I have been planning, instead of us doing a Halloween trick-or-treating event, we've been planning to do an All Saints Day party. So we were going to turn my office, because I own a karate school, so I've got a fairly large just box space. We were going to open it up to all of our Catholic friends to bring their kids over, and we were going to have an All Saints Day party. So that way the kids still kind of have the, you know, the social aspect of, you know, Halloween, but with kind of like promoting that celebrity of people who deserve it, right? So the saints, the martyrs of our church that have earned a right to be recognized and imitated by children, instead of, you know, like, you know, last year at Halloween, it was kind of like dress as scantily as you can, or like the most wealthy person you know. And it was kind of disappointing. And I was really excited because this year my son has been, he's been cutting up like binder sheet paper to make himself a taped up body armor of Saint Michael, which just looks like binder paper all mishmashed together with, you know, 8 gobs of duct tape, which I think is super cool. That those are the kinds of kids, or those are the kinds of people that my son is trying to emulate in his, almost like in his playtime, like when he's acting like somebody that he's not. That's who he's acting like, and I think that's a cool thing.
Right. Yeah, and my kids, ever since I came back to the church, which actually predates my kids, so ever since I was, my kids have either been, you know, like a firefighter. I used to be a firefighter. My daughter has been a dinosaur before, or riding a dinosaur. But the more they grew up, you know, her costumes became Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, because I guess when we were in Alabama, people thought that we were Native American, and so she latched onto that for a little bit, and she found a Native American saint. We're not Native American, which I take no offense to any of the people who thought we were, because Native Americans thought that we were Native American when I was stationed in North Dakota. I was shooting archery at a competition, and after I had gotten done with my set, I get a tap on the shoulder, and this is tall Native American dude standing behind me, and he was like, "So, what tribe are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm Filipino." And he's like, "I've never heard of that tribe before." And I was just like, "I don't have the heart to tell you right now." We became really good friends. But anyways, so my daughter has been dressing up as her as of late. And then, but she loves St. Catherine of Siena. She considers St. Catherine her patron saint. and my little son Pio. So my daughter's name is Misa, named her after the Latin or Spanish for mass, so that she has a good, healthy self-image. Because I tell her, well, what's the mass? And her answer ever since she's been a tiny little girl has been, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. I'm like, exactly. And so my son Pio, Paulo Ignacio, named after two saints and then a third saint for his nickname, he dressed up as a priest last year. And I don't know if you knew this, but it was really weird that he was 4 years old. This is when we first got here to Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. We had just moved into the house, and he pulls me aside, and he's like, "Hey, Papa, can I tell you a secret?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, I'm your papa. You can tell me anything." And so he pulls me into the closet and closes the door. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of secret is this going to be? Do I need to get a gun or a knife? And so I'm like, all right, you got to tell me the secret. And he's like, I talked to Jesus. And I was like, well, that's good, son. It's good to pray. Yeah. And he's like, no. He talked to me. Oh, okay. All right. What did he say? Because at this point, I'm like, I'm a skeptical guy. I'm a test everything, kind of like Thomas. It may not be a great trait, but I tell you what, slow and steady, I think, wins the race. I'm not going to fall head over heels for anything until I test it up against some stuff. And so I'm like, so what did he say? And he's like, he wants me to become his priest. And I'm thinking to myself, you're 4 years old. But and the only reason I thought like that was because I never had anything really like that happen to me as a 4-year-old kid. And, I can't tell him that that's exactly what happened, but I'm not going to tell him that that's not what happened either. And so I was like, all right, well, keep your ears open for the rest of your life, because you have a long time before you have to be sure to say yes. And right now he's dead set on it. He constantly asking me questions about the Mass. Just yesterday, he was asking me, plumbing the depths of the mystery of the Trinity. He's like, if God is the Father, how can he also be the Son and the Holy Spirit? And I'm like, that's a great question.
Yeah. So I'm a bad parent. Two of my three kids.
Hello?
Long before so my son stole it when he was like 3.5, maybe 4. And like when he did it, I can't remember. I think it was like my mom or my dad. Like there was a couple people in front of me, and he goes up and, we've only ever taught him to receive on the tongue. So he stands there and he's got his arms across his chest. And I think he's going up to get this prayer. And sure enough, he turns around. He's got this like ear to ear smile. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I come up, I receive, I go back to the pew, and I'm kneeling down, and he's kneeling down, and he opens his mouth, and it's in his mouth. And I was like, you need to eat that. You need to finish that right now. And I was like, why did you do that? I'm like, you're not old enough. We've talked about this. Because he's been asking, he had been asking forever when he was going to be old enough to receive. And I said, he's got to be like 7 or 8. There's a couple things that he's got to do. And he was always really kind of disappointed. And I was like, you're not old enough. And he's like, well, I just love Jesus so much that I wanted to have him in me. And I was like, that's a really good answer. I can't really say anything. And then as we were leaving Mass, he kind of like elbows me and he's like, hey, Daddy. I was like, what's up, son? He's like, I have a question. I was like, okay, what do you want to know? He goes, what part of Jesus did I eat? Was it like his arm? And I like looked at him and I was like, no, son, it was probably his heart. And he's like, okay, thank you. And it was just like, it was one of those moments where when I was a kid, I wish I would have had an understanding of Catholicism and the Eucharist like my son does. Like it took me years to understand the concept of the physical presence in the Eucharist. It took me forever to get that. And, he's 7 now, but he was 4 or 3 back then. And he like picked it up like it was Like it was something that was just so simple to him. He was like, oh yeah, totally. It's Jesus. Like what part of him did I just eat? And you're like, oh, okay. I guess I'm doing okay as a parent if that's the kind of question he asks.
Right.
So.
And during Mass, one of the biggest things, it works for me anyways. So I don't know what other Catholic parents do. I don't do the coloring books, or the random toys. Even when they were like 2 or 3 years old, I don't do those things to distract them. I don't do the children's liturgy, which I don't understand that part quite yet, and I'm glad that it's not mandatory. So whenever I'm at Mass and they're like, "Oh, the children come forward," I'm like, "No, my children will stay here," and I'm teaching them out of the missal and going, here's where we are. It doesn't matter if they fully understand what is going on. The way I look at it is the 3 R's, repetition, refinement, and reinforcement. Because it doesn't matter, like even with my daughter, I'm always looking at her to make sure that she's paying attention during Mass. And that's the big thing. Whether it's the Latin Mass or the Novus Ordo, you got to be paying attention. It's like, call it a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it whenever people are doing like, personal devotions as if
the Mass wasn't enough.
Right. Like, I get it. I was talking to, another person before, and they were like, yeah, it's a pious thing to do, to pray the rosary during Mass. I'm not saying that it's not, but you're at Mass. You can pray the rosary anywhere. You can pray the rosary at Eucharistic adoration, but the Eucharistic adoration rosary is not Mass. Just like during, Novus Ordo Mass, same Mass, really, because Jesus is present, you should be paying attention. If you're not paying attention, then you're not giving of yourself. If you're not giving of yourself, then what's the difference between you sitting at home watching Mass on the TV or not attending at all and actually being and, giving of yourself at Mass? And so with my kids, especially during the consecration, I was like, all right, I'll point up to the altar and I'll make a deliberate effort of it going, who's that? And I condition them. And I know for those non-Catholics who get to listen to the show, I get it. It sounds like brainwashing to you folks, but it's no different than people, getting brainwashed in the public school system with, silly things when people say that God doesn't exist. So for me, I'm teaching my kids and they're going, that's Jesus. And so you have to do that for the kids, because like for me, like my father, he wasn't really into the faith when I was a kid. Thankfully he's come back to the faith and he goes to like daily Mass pretty much regularly, which is,
amen.
I'm into that. But like when I was a kid, what he would do is he'd take the missalette and he'd fold it for the days that were already complete. And so he'd fold it in and, it looked like he was bored. Or he'd take the, not the program, what are those handouts at the end of?
Like the bulletin?
Yeah, he'd take the bulletin and he'd make paper airplanes and stuff. And so as a young boy watching his father, and to make matters worse, when my grandfather lived with us, he didn't even attend Mass. He would tell me that he had a special agreement with God that he didn't have to do it. And so, and my grandfather, he grew up, with the Latin Mass, and he's just like, no thanks. And, he hadn't been back to church in forever unless he was attending a wedding or whatever. And so I was just like, I promised myself when I got married and had kids that was not going to happen with me. And so I'm very strict, but at the same time, the strictness comes with joy. It comes with the wonder the joy and the wonder that should accompany the Mass. And so, for whatever other people do, that's what I do, and it seems to work. My kids, they pay attention during Mass, despite even my 4-year-old. He likes to voice out his questions as if, everybody needed to hear what he was asking. but that's okay. That's okay.
It's great. Obviously, like we split our time between the Novus Ordo and the Latin Mass. We've got there's this priest. He's like 31 years old. This guy is on fire. So when he says Sunday morning Mass, I'd move heaven and earth to drive around to find whatever parish this priest is saying Mass at. So we were at the Novus Ordo, and the one thing that I've always harped on my kids about is when the consecration is going on, you don't bow your head, you look at it. The bell rings, and then when the priest genuflects, that's when you bow your head, right? Because you want to watch that miracle happen. And it was a couple of weeks ago, we were at this Novus Ordo, and it was really, the biggest difference that I found between Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo is just like the Latin Mass has way more quiet in the moments in between things going on, and the Novus Ordo almost always seems to have like that white noise. But I was talking to my youngest daughter, and she was like screaming, and I hate putting them in the kid timeout room, or I hate bringing my kids out of Mass because I want them to experience it, and I don't want them to feel like they're an embarrassment when we're at church and they're acting like kids. So I'm trying to like talk to her as much as I can, being like a negotiator with a 1-year-old. and my son, so he takes karate full time, and he thinks every moment is the appropriate moment to turn into like an MMA fighter. So he like elbows me in the ribs about as hard as I've ever been hit in my life. And I look over at him, and I've got that look of death, like I'm about to kill him. And he was like, "Dad, Jesus is about to show up." And I look up at the altar because he's pointing at the altar. And sure enough, the priest was like elevating it. And I was like, "Good on you.
Nice. Good
on you." I was like, "Good." I was like, "You get extra bacon at breakfast." Good move. And it's so funny because, like what I love about kids is that they just don't care. Like they don't really understand. So we go to this Novus Ordo parish, and when people do like the holding hands or like the communal, blessing of each other.
Oh, what?
My son. So like, what was it? We went to a Mass, and the priest asked everybody to hold their hands out and bless the person next to them.
What?
Like how a priest would, right? Like he was like, put your hands over them and pray that the Holy Spirit. And so the first time it happened,
I've not seen that.
It is so wonky, which frustrates me. But so my son tried to do it, and I looked at him and I was like, you don't command the Holy Spirit like a priest does. So you shouldn't do that, right? And he was like, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "Yeah." And so like the next weekend we were at the same Novus Ordo parish, and some nice do-gooding woman goes to do it to him, and he looked at her and he was like, "You don't command the Holy Spirit." And it was just like, yeah, maybe don't say that so loud, but I appreciate you trying to like stand up for what I've said and that you believe, but there's a time and a place. But he's great. He loves the Mass. It's so cool.
I think what really helps, you were talking about the cry room just a second ago. What really helps is priests who understand that kids are going to be kids, that hearing crying in the pew means that there's the future of the church present, instead of, because here's the thing, like, quiet is good, silence is good, but at the same time, you have that voice crying. Like, to me, it's like the voice crying out in the wilderness. It's okay, especially for kids who don't know better. It's not, people aren't there solely to be able to find their quote unquote moment of Zen. People are there to be with each other, to offer themselves up to God, and to receive the Eucharist and to be sent afterwards. People aren't there to just get a moment of silence. And so when priests are, smile instead of look annoyed when babies are crying, then that signals, it's a great signal to the rest of the people that it's okay. And now it'd be different if it was like adults. If adults are causing a ruckus, then that's, tremendously different. But if it's a crying child, then, as parents, we don't need to get as, I guess, socially conscious or embarrassed.
It's embarrassment more than anything else.
Right.
Like you're afraid, because this is one of the conversations I had with my wife. My wife is a convert, and when we went to mass with our son and he would just start crying, my wife would have this like look of embarrassment on her face because everybody would be looking at us. And I just all I remember was in the Gospels when the apostles are trying to remove the kids from Christ as Christ is preaching, and Christ is just like, no. He goes, stop. Let them come to me. Let the children come and be with me. And it was so important because I was just reminding my wife, I was like, we're not, and this is nothing about the Novus Ordo. I've only ever experienced this at an NO Mass, only because there's more of a communal feeling at a Novus Ordo than there is at a Latin Mass. But when I'm there, I'm not actually at Mass to like experience the other people there. And like, I really couldn't care any less what people think about how my kid behaves or how I'm dressed or if my wife is veiled or if she's not, if her pants are too tight or if her skirt is too long or like any of that stuff. Like none of that matters to me. The only thing that matters to me is that I receive Christ in the Word and Christ in the flesh. That's what matters to me. And if my kid is a little bit mouthy because he's a kid, then so be it. And so long as he's not being unbelievably disruptive to the priest, where the priest is having a hard time concentrating on his job, then I don't see the big deal. And so I used to remember telling my wife about that. It's like, that's like the priest should have recognized like Catholic kids come with being in a Catholic church. And it's not like this is the first time a priest has heard of a kid crying. Like it happens. And it's a beautiful thing because, again, like what you were saying, like it's when kids are crying, it's a reminder that the church is growing instead of dying, right? Like you don't want to hear silence. I like the cooing, the giggling, the crying, and the screaming because that reminds me that Christ's church has not only a new member, but is getting bigger. Hopefully it's getting bigger, as opposed to when you hear that silence. Like we all know, I mean, you especially, you've got 4 kids. Like kids are almost never quiet.
Nope.
So like when you hear that silence, something is going wrong. Like they're doing something they shouldn't be, they're into something they shouldn't be, or they're just not there. So when you hear that dead silence at Mass, it's almost depressing now. Now that I've lived for, almost 8 years with nonstop kid, I love that feeling, that sound that kids have because they're just always talking. When you go to Mass and it's not there, you feel like there's something missing. Like there should be somebody there with you and they're not. And, one of the first priests in my town that I live in now, the first Mass I went to, he literally stopped his homily because there was a woman whose kid was crying and he like stared her down until she picked her kid up and left.
This was a priest?
This was a priest. He was like 800 years old, and he didn't last very long. But I remember he stopped his homily and stared at her until she left with her child. And I was just thinking to myself, and I was really young. I was like 17. I was like, that just seems really, like it seems like almost hypocritical. Like the church is supposed to be inviting everybody into her, not stopping and pointing out somebody who, God bless him, at 8 o'clock in the morning, that woman was there dressed pretty nicely and her kid was there dressed at 8 a.m. Like that's really difficult. And for anybody who's listening to this who doesn't have kids, getting your kids up and dressed and out of the house by 7:30 at the latest in the morning, that's a task. And this woman did that, and her reward wasn't encouragement and gratitude. It was almost, it was like a low level of like disgust. And I've seen things like that, and it's so frustrating. And thank God there's this reinvigoration, this revitalizing of the church in a youthful manner, where like it's not like you see the Catholic family with 1 or 2 kids. You see the Catholic family with 5, 6, 7, 8 kids. And that to me speaks volumes to the direction that Holy Mother Church is actually heading into, as opposed to what you hear if you watch, any of the big church, news organizations, like the church is crumbling and, Satan is around the corner. It's like, I think the church is going through some issues, but if you just look in the pew and you see the number of young kids with young families, I think it's going somewhere else. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think parents should be commended for bringing their kids to mass, because we all know it's not that easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just in mass, but hopefully folks out there realize that mass is just 1 hour a week, unless you're going to daily mass. And even then, daily mass is like 30 minutes out of 24 hours. And so
it's like 30 minutes tops.
And that's one of the things is that as great as mass is, we, especially as lay people, have to remember the mission to which we're sent at the end of mass. Ite missa est is not, all right, thanks for showing up. It's done.
See you in a week.
It's actually, all right, whatever happened in here, you bring out there so that we have more people in here. It's supposed to be sending forth. And so hopefully people recognize that it's not one of those things that you just do because you were told to do it and you've done it since you were a kid. Hopefully people recognize that every single time that you attend mass, you're being sent afterwards, because this world is getting crazy. And I'm not saying that the world hasn't been crazy before. The world's always been crazy since original sin. But this is the time and place that I'm living in. And in the short time that I've been living in it, especially as an adult, goodness gracious. Talking about the problems of raising a Catholic kid in the secular world, having to explain to them that, we are a broken people, because of original sin, and some people are broken in different ways, i.e., same-sex attraction or this new transgender stuff. And I was like, look, I know that these people are hurting, and you don't necessarily need to make their pain any worse, but at the same time, you can't tell them that their pain is a good thing. You can't tell them that their pain is a normal thing, especially when it's self-inflicted. Their pain can be a salvific thing if they join it to Christ in the appropriate manner. But it's not one of those things that you want to pat them on the back for. And so, and whatever that, because whenever the catechism says that it's intrinsically disordered, and I know that Father Martin has problems with those words because to him it's hurtful. You know what? The truth hurts sometimes. And that's the simple matter of it is masturbation is intrinsically disordered. If you're married and you cheat on your spouse, that's intrinsically disordered. If you're single and you have sex before marriage, that's intrinsically disordered. There's a lot of sin is intrinsically disordered. So
yeah, there was a podcast that you did with Catholic Millennial.
Is it which one? There were like two millennials.
Christian. Not Christian, the other one.
Oh, the redhead dude.
Yeah, the redheaded beard guy.
Yep.
And you were talking about, and this is the one thing, and I'm so glad you said it because I've been talking about it forever. Like the first sin was the fact that Adam was abdicating his role as a husband while his wife was conversing with Satan in the garden, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge issue. And I was thinking about it. The next big sin is Eve's because she was so discontent with her position that she allowed herself to have the conversation.
So
right? Like she wasn't happy with the knowledge that she had. So when the devil approached her and spoke to her about the knowledge in the tree of good and evil, that she could be like God, she was so discontent with how she was that she wanted to be something else, which is the sin of Satan. He didn't want to be just an angel. He wanted to be God. And that was Eve's sin. Before she even ate of the fruit, her sin was she wasn't happy with what her, not position in like a rank kind of way, but just how she was. And I think that's the biggest infection that I see in society today is people just, they're not happy with how things are, and they're constantly trying to become their own God. And it's so frustrating, especially when you have kids, because you're like, they're like, why, Daddy, why did they do this? And Daddy, why do they do that? Like, the school that I own is right next to an acting studio, and they do acting, dancing, modeling, singing, all of that business. And it's really hard for me to press the issue of modest dress with my kids when the modeling studio next to me pushes the exact opposite, but with the same words. I say you're worth so much more than presenting your body to the public, right? Like, you're beautiful not because of how God made your body look, but because of how God made your soul look. And the acting school will say things like, you're so beautiful because of how you look. And because of that, you dress immodestly. And when I say it to my kids, it's like, you dress modestly. It's so difficult. Those kids, you see them and they none of them look happy, and they're all trying to be like their own God. And they're trying to have it all, and they're trying to like not step out of their bounds and step out of their lane, which is I encourage people to kind of like open up and do things that are struggling, or not struggling, but that are difficult, so that they can grow. But when you try to become something that you can never be, right? Like Eve could never become God. Lucifer could never become God. And when we step out of our lane so far, it does nothing but bring unto us suffering and pain. I had a transgender client, and they wanted to be a woman. And no matter how hard they tried, and no matter how much makeup they put on, or how many haircuts they got, how many surgeries they got, how many hormones they took, that person was always going to be a man. And that it's so difficult to kind of explain that, especially to your kids, because it's like, they say that they're, I'm a woman, and I'm this and I'm that. And you try to kind of like not tone it back, but be like, that's what they think. But that's not true. And so you're juggling that difference between like a subjective truth and an objective truth. And that gets really difficult sometimes with kids, because they don't understand the difference between what they encounter and what is actually like objective, right? Like my kid stubs their toe and they're like dying. You're like, yeah, well, it doesn't hurt. And they're like, oh no, it hurts. Like the world is collapsing. I'm going to cry for 6 hours. And you're like, yeah, that's not really all that bad, but to them it's not. And so sometimes it can get really frustrating as a parent when you're trying to juggle subjective and objective truths with your kids when it comes to dealing with a society where objective truth doesn't even exist. It's not even a concept that they buy into. Everything is just a subjective truth, which means that everything is just, it's so easily malleable given the person that's presenting it,
Yeah, and for me, I always fall back to, what does the Catechism say? What has the Church said for ages, on these matters of faith and morals? Because I don't want them just going, well, my father said it. That's great, but when you pit father against father, when they meet another adult who says something different, they're going to get confused. But when you say, hey, this is God, this is God who's saying this. It carries a little bit more weight, especially if they hear it often enough and over, and not in a hateful and hurtful manner. Because that's the thing. Like with Eve, she probably, I wasn't there. She probably, the only thing that I can that I can see is that she said that maybe she was trying to go up to bat because Adam wouldn't, and she was like, hold on a second, God didn't say that, God said this. And then the devil's like, are you sure? And she's like, well, now that you put it that way, and either way, you had Adam who's not doing anything. And like for today, we have to do something, especially the men in the household. Even if you don't have kids, even if you're not married, you still have to take a stand for the church. And even if you're a female, you still got to take a stand for the church. And the way you do that is, go to the Catechism. And when someone says that gay marriage is okay, You don't necessarily have to punch them in the face every single time. You punch them in the face if they punch you in the face. You could turn the other cheek. Maybe that might work out in that scenario. I don't know that that's necessarily every scenario or even most scenarios. But you answer with, what does God say and why? Honestly, remember why he says it. Like if someone says, they were born that way, don't dispute them on that, because it doesn't change a thing. Even if they were born that way, who cares? They still make life choices. Because if you're going to try and make that argument that, you weren't born that way, it's like, people are born pretty jacked up, post original sin. Like it wouldn't surprise me if genetically they were just mutated into this poor wretch of a person who has this incredible cross that I can't even fathom bearing. So why make it worse with arguing a point that doesn't matter when you can argue a point that does, which is, okay, I get it. You have these hormonal imbalances as a cause of your, mother smoking or taking birth control pills that probably jacked you up somehow. I don't know. Whatever the case is, the point is that you still make life choices. And if you look at it from the natural law perspective, you take religion out of it. If you look at it from the natural law perspective, it's, there's something that's greater for you than just these, physical impulses. You're more than that. You're more than just an animal. And if you go from that tactic, you're not arguing these silly things like, I was biologically born a male, but internally I'm a female. And I'm just like, you're as confused as every other person who, just like every other man who's like, well, my wife cheated on me, so I'm going to cheat on her. Those kind of arguments don't hold water, is what I guess what I'm trying to say. And so if you go back to what the church teaches on matters of faith and morals, it hasn't changed. It literally hasn't changed. Nothing has changed. Not bad popes, not bad times. It stays the same. And you can take that to the bank, tell your kids, you don't have to, you don't pat them on the back for it. Maybe make a concession if they I don't know, I've met dudes named Sue before, I guess, from the Johnny Cash song. So if I guess a dude wants to call themselves Sue and a girl wants to call herself Rick, whatever, people call themselves all kinds of crazy names nowadays. But you don't have to go she or je or accommodate necessarily their preferred pronoun. Like in the military, it's kind of crazy. I'm not kidding, man. It's one of those things to where I will go by rank and name. I don't care. I'm not going to jeopardize my future livelihood for my family on a silly pronoun war. And I'm just going to be like, Sergeant so-and-so, Lieutenant so-and-so. That is, that is who you are. Maybe sport, maybe champ, maybe pal, or I don't know, whatever other non-gender specific, but they're not going to get me to bend to that aspect, because it just, even those small concessions with the,
it's never that small. It's always that, and then it's that until it's the next thing.
They're always, it's just like what people were saying was like, we're not going to try and force the churches to accept our bull crap.
Yeah.
Of course you are.
Said safe, legal, and rare was the term with abortion. And now you get,
abortion on demand.
Yeah. Abortion on demand. More black babies in New York are aborted than born. It's never just this. And, to your point, I had a client who was transgender, and they had a name. So they legally changed their name from something to something else. And I only ever refer to them by their name. And one time they came up to me and they were like, well, I prefer the she, her pronouns. And I was like, well, that's fine. I prefer using your name because it's a name that you picked. You went through the effort of changing it legally.
Right.
So I'm going to use your name. And they were like, well, I really feel like you don't accept me until you use the she, her pronouns. And I was like, I'm going to use the name that you've demanded that people use, because I'm not going to bend on my belief, just as you're not going to bend on your belief. You're not going to debate me into thinking that you're actually a woman, and I'm not going to debate you into thinking that you're still actually a guy. I was like, how about we both respect the positions that we each hold, treat each other with dignity, and again, like, go back to how Christ dealt with everybody. Christ dealt with everybody, especially those he disagreed with dignity and charity. But he held his line. You know, I always like to talk about the woman at the well. When he left her, he didn't leave her and say like, oh, cool, you know, like try not to sleep with so many guys. He was like, go forth and sin no more. There was a line drawn. It was drawn respectfully, but there's the line. And each one of us, and I think that's the one thing that I've really enjoyed and hated the most about being a parent, was teaching my kid what line they should choose to draw. Right? Like, is this worth dying over? No? Well, don't draw the line then. If you're not going to be dying on this hill for this thing, then don't draw the line, because there's no point in drawing a line if you're just going to let people walk all over it. And it gets really difficult, especially again with kids. Kids always want to be accepting, and they always want to be open, and they always want to love everybody. And that's just the beautiful nature in God's design with children. So when they're encountering people where they have to draw the line, it's really important as parents that we teach them the mechanism by which they decide what thing they want to draw the line over, as opposed to what they should draw a line over. I mean, obviously, you know, as a parent, your job is to tell them certain things, like you're never allowed to go alone with this person or with that person or with these kinds of people. But outside of like the safety of my child, when it comes to where they draw the line, it's kind of up to them, right? Like, you know, if my son wanted to, you know, like we've got a couple different nicknames for him that have just kind of stuck over the years. And if one day he comes up to me and he's like, I don't want to be called that, it'd be like, you know what, if you're making that decision and you've gone through the mental, you know, jujitsu over the pros and cons of that, then I'll respect that. But I think we need to get back to like actually teaching our kids that it's okay to draw lines with people.
Oh yeah.
Because that's so important. And so often I hear parents and again, like that comes from just the industry that I'm in. I hear parents that like the mental gymnastics they do in order to tell their kids to not draw lines over things that they despise is so frustrating, because it's like, no, I want you to stand up and act like a parent and tell your kid that they shouldn't do this or they shouldn't do that. But they're like, well, I just, you know, I want to be inclusive and accepting and, you know, X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool, but you're going to have a really hard time raising your kid to do anything productive, because all your kid is going to be doing is trying to be this socially amicable, you know, contortion artist where all they do is bend themselves backwards to accommodate everybody. I have a line, I draw it in the sand, and when I do and people confront it, I'm kind and respectful and charitable, but I'm firm. And that's something. So again, kind of going back, we haven't gotten really off topic, but when it comes to raising kids, there are certain things that I do not bend on when it comes to activities and people that my children are allowed to interact with. Right. And I mean, so I'm huge on safety, right? And not like, you know, my kids are allowed to do dangerous things. Like my kids go shooting all the time, and I'm all about that. I'm more concerned with like an outward safety where like the people around them could be dangerous. So if I have a really hard time ensuring the safety of my kids and my wife in an environment, we probably won't go there. And when people are like, oh, don't be such a downer, it's like, you know what? No, I'm not going to be a downer, because tomorrow morning I can guarantee you my kids are going to wake up in their beds happy and alive. And so is my wife, and so am I. You can't guarantee that so much when you go to these activities. So I teach that to my son and my daughters. And it's like, sometimes we might not do the quote unquote cool, popular things. But what we do have is we have a connection with each other, and we have a level of not safety, but like security that other people can't guarantee, because we acknowledge that we live in a world that's full of broken people, a disordered people. Again, the sin of Adam and Eve are on all of us, whether we admit it or not. Like, just because you don't believe in Adam and Eve and you don't believe in God doesn't mean that that original sin doesn't taint you. It taints everybody. And those of us that accept that can work past it. And those of us that don't, it ends up biting us in the butt. But you got to explain that to your kids. And it's difficult sometimes, especially when they get, for me, it's more hard with movies, because like all of these kids, they want to like invite my son or my daughter to like go out to the movies. And you're like, well, that movie is probably not something they're allowed to see, because almost every movie now is some pro-gay, pro-LGBTQ, pro-transgenderism, pro-talking smack about your parents thing. And it's like, I just don't let my kids see that stuff. And it can get difficult, but I guess the upside to it is being Catholic. There's so many others that are beginning to think like that we can kind of just build our own community and interact with each other, so our kids really don't miss out. And I don't, I'm not talking like Benedict option where we go buy a plot of land in Montana and just kind of like live off the land and don't own cell phones.
I wouldn't actually mind that. That's my goal at the end of after 20 years in the Air Force. That's actually my goal. Wyoming. Let's go off the grid.
My wife and I have been talking about Wyoming forever, because it's like the best state.
Where in Wyoming?
Anywhere we can get like 20 acres.
Man, go to Lander, Wyoming Catholic College. So once I finish my doctorates, I'm going to go teach there. That place is so, not Lander per se, but Wyoming Catholic College. It is so Catholic. It is so Catholic that I was like, man, maybe I need to be more Catholic. And I was like, I thought I was pretty Catholic, but I'm like, these kids. So quick story, and I'm not a graduate of Wyoming Catholic College, but I hope my kids will be. And so I remember I was having one of those times in the Air Force where I was like, I don't know, maybe this isn't for me. I think I was maybe 12 years in at the time, maybe 11 years in. And so I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And lo and behold, some folks from Wyoming Catholic College spoke at the local library in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And they're like, you know what? Yeah, you got a degree in theology. We're a small school. We're looking for teachers. Why don't you come out and visit with us? And so I visited. And I kid you not, Euclidean geometry or whatever the heck that they were studying, these kids were engaged. These kids were, I don't know if they were putting on a show for me, but they were interested, and it was amazing. And then they go, hey, do you want to go see where we go to Mass? And I was like, yeah, let's go. And you had a young man and a young woman underneath a tree. It looked like it was perfect for a picture. And I had to ask them what they were doing, because I was like, where's the camera? I don't see a camera. So I was like, hey, if you don't mind, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're writing a play. Is this for a class? Oh, no, it's for fun. We had just read the Jewelers, St. Pope John Paul II wrote a play, and we had read it, and now we want to write a Catholic play too. And I'm thinking to myself, for fun? That's what you guys are at 18, 19, 20 years old? That's amazing. I was like, yep, this is where I'm landing after time is done in the Air Force. Cause I was just like, that place is, and so much hunting, so much fishing, so much everything outdoors. We're going to have a farm. Not for like selling and stuff, but
just to live off.
Yeah, I mean, like, not that I'm a hippie per se, but I don't trust nobody. I got a little bit of prepper in me, just a little bit of prepper, and like if I can help it, like I'll butcher my own animal, because I've stopped trusting butchers whenever I go hunting and I drop it off. Am I getting my own deer back, or are they just
yeah, exactly
like? And how much how much of this is actually the deer versus some, rancid meat that they're mixing in there and putting in the spices. Like, so I learned how to butcher my own meat. And so hopefully, if you guys are talking about Wyoming, Lander, Wyoming is a pretty great town with a really Catholic character because of Wyoming Catholic College. So, and
that's beautiful.
Yeah, man. And just so that my alma mater doesn't get, a little butt hurt. Holy Apostles College and Seminary, also great place to get a bachelor's and master's. In fact, True Grit Catholic is getting his master's in theology there as we speak. Good luck on your paper, brother. That's for you, Jeremy. And so, but otherwise, Wyoming, beautiful state, beautiful, just like you were saying. Oh my gosh, it's the life goal, and probably a really great place to raise kids. I mean, let's be honest. If these are what the college kids are doing, writing daggum Catholic plays instead of...
Can't go wrong, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not what I was thinking when I was a college kid, unfortunately.
I think that's the great thing, too, about... it's funny, again, talking about my profession. I deal with a lot of parents and kids. And when I see parents, taking pride in promoting, almost sins of the flesh, a cute girl walks by and the son, is kind of staring out of the corner of his eye, and the dad's like, "Oh no, son, it's okay to look at her. Look at that." And you're like, yeah, maybe not. Because, I don't think any of us, if you were to stare at that, are going to have pious thoughts.
No,
that's not what that's not what you're teaching your kid. And it gets really hard. And every so often, so again, I was for a good minute, I was a Latin mass or nothing kind of guy. And it came partially because I was really tired of just the abuses that I saw in the Novus Ordo Mass, and in the Latin Mass, there's just less opportunity for somebody to go sideways during the liturgy, which again, you're in the Air Force, I was in the Marine Corps. I find it's easier to produce a product of high quality when the process to create the product is less kind of improvisation, right? When it's a little bit more regimented, it's less hard to go wonky on you. But the great feeling that I had was just kind of this overall Catholic sense, right? And in the story that I tell everybody, I was in line to go to confession. I can't remember how it happened, but it was just me holding my youngest daughter, and she was probably 4 or 5 months at the time. And I'm waiting in line, and I get up, and I'm next in the chute, and the door opens, and my wife wasn't in the building yet. And I was just kind of how am I going to, am I going to bring the kid in with me? I'm doing the mental math on how this is going to work. And this woman stands up, walks over to me, and she asks if she could hold my kid so that I could go receive a sacrament. And I looked at her and I was like, yeah, here you go. Here's my baby. She's probably going to scream, but I'm going to go to confession because that's important too. And I came out, and my daughter was just asleep in this woman's arms. And I look, and she's got 9 kids next to her. So she's an expert at this, keeping babies from going nuts business. But it just felt so Catholic. And I was like, you can't really go wrong when in my last parish, I had somebody come up to me and give me tips on how to medicate my kids so they're more tired during Mass, so that they're less loud. If you give them children's Motrin, they're less cryy. And you're like, yeah, how about if I give you adult Motrin and you have a stroke? Don't talk to me like that. But it was just it had that Catholic sensation, and it was just so attractive that it was, somebody asked me on Instagram today, the hardest part about being Catholic, or the hardest part of Catholicism. And to me, the hardest part has never been a faith. It's been interacting in a culture that's dead set against every single thing that we believe. Yeah. And I felt so Catholic in that church at that moment, just handing off my child with somebody that I knew intrinsically was going to love that child the same way that I did, because they understood the value of children in the grand scheme of life. And it was just so comforting. I was able to hand off my daughter. I received my sacrament. I got out and I picked her back up and I went down and I did my penance and everything. It was just so beautiful. And then, I opened up my eyes a little bit more. I'm an all in or all out kind of guy. So when I went to the Latin Mass, like if it wasn't Latin, it was heresy. Like not really, but I didn't see a point in going to a Novus Ordo if you have a Latin Mass accessible to you. And then we had, the changing of the guard, and the priest kind of came in and he's kind of gone sideways on everybody, which has been a disappointment. But
yeah, I think I read your post about that.
I was so disappointed about it. I really was. I was really crushed, because it's a beautiful movement. And, this revitalizing of a beautiful Mass and a beautiful liturgy. I really do. I mean, it's not 2,000 years old. It's not even, 60 years old yet. But the Latin Mass liturgy is beautiful. And I think there's a lot of great things that come out of going to the Latin Mass that you don't get when you go to a Novus Ordo. But if you don't have a good priest, you're not going to get them. Right.
And that's the thing, is that whenever I get into those conversations, the Latin Mass is great insofar as as far as that liturgy actually transforms you interiorly. I mean, like, you can say all the words, do all the actions, but if it's not transformative, then it's, it's lip service, and that's for the priest as well. Like, it's really sad. And that's why I think you hit the nail on the head. If someone asked me that question, what's the hardest part about being a Catholic? For me, my answer's similar. One is being Christ to others, and two, it's recognizing Christ in others. Only because this world is so, dirty and broken, it's hard for me to remind myself this person was created in God's image and likeness. Are they able to see God's image and likeness in me and how I'm treating them? And it is so, like, talking about lip service. It's so easy for me to say, this is what the church believes. This is what the church teaches. Because that's black and white. That's easy. But then when I have to live it,
that's where it gets difficult.
You mean, like, because like, say, for example, with the kids, right? Like, I remember, so this was one example, and hopefully people don't hate me for it. If they do, it's okay. My family will love me. But we were serving at a soup kitchen, because I told my kids, we're sent, we're going to make disciples of all nations. One of the ways to do that is to, earlier I was saying, recognize Christ in others, and hopefully they recognize Christ in you. And so we were serving at a soup kitchen. And this one dude was going through the line, and people who eat at the soup kitchen, they're not rich people. And so he was going through the line, but he was complaining about every single daggum thing that was being given to him for free. And so my patience at that point, we were in Wyoming, and so this was a few years back. So hopefully I've matured since then. But man, my example to my kids was not very good that day. I don't know because at that point I was, it was the truth. He should be grateful for, I told him he should be grateful for what he was being given, because it was being given for free. And, he doesn't necessarily do anything to earn it. But at the same time, the look on my face was arrogance, disgust, annoyance. It was anything but trying to promote the truth in charity. It wasn't even like, righteous anger. It was just, at that point, my kids saw that I thought that I was better than that guy. And that's not the right example. And like, if someone asked me, just like I said, what's the hardest part, is not just being able to proclaim the truth, but being able to live it, because that part is hard.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, I had a similar experience. I do a food drive once a year at my business, and it ends up every year I have about a truck bed full of canned foods. And the tradition in my family is Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. I load my kids up, or my son, depending on who's awake or, whatever. And we drive to the soup kitchen, which is always open. And we donate all of that food on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, because that's such a beautiful gift, right? And I like the timing of it because it goes to giving other people a beautiful celebration on a day that deserves to be celebrated, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And one year I went, and there's a massive line, as there almost always is. And I back my truck up and I hop out of the truck and I cut the line to go in to get somebody to open up the rolling bay door so I could offload all of the food that I had. And this woman who's in line, and again, she's probably like wearing everything that she owns. And she looked at me and she started just like talking really poorly about me. There's a line, yada, yada, yada. Don't cut it. You're a blinkety, blinkety, bloopity, bleep. And I looked at her and I opened up the bed of my truck. And I mean, this is no exaggeration. It's full, wall to wall, top to bottom, with canned foods and turkey dinners and all of this stuff. And I looked at her and I was like, well, how about I just take this somewhere else where somebody else is more grateful? And I remember I snapped at her and I just felt so bad about it. And it is difficult when, I feel like Christ was able to see himself in everybody else because he was God, and right. I don't, because I'm not. But it is, I think you nailed it on the head. It is the hardest part about being a Christian, is seeing Christ in other people, because other people, and I'm not exaggerating, and I'm sure you've met them too. There are people where I do not see a single thing about them that is good. They don't love anybody. They're all about themselves. They abuse people. They take advantage of everybody. They're arrogant and self-indulgent, and they're gluttonous, and they're a sloth, and they're all of these things. And it's like, how do you see Christ in somebody like that? And, then you turn to a kid and they're like, well, they're made in the image of God. And you're like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, good answer, 5-year-old. Thank you. That's cool. I'm going to stop talking now. Like, it's so difficult. Kids see it so readily because they're so innocent and they're less jaded. And, again, like it was in the gospel this weekend. I just think you just need to be like a kid. Like, and that's the hardest thing, is like, I don't want to be like a kid. I want to be like an adult. I'm an adult. I've earned the right to be an adult now. But, my priest said something. He said, when you hear kids crying in the pews, he goes, don't be upset, because it's the voices of the angels. Right. And it was a really powerful thing that he said, because there are a lot of kids. Again, I was at the Latin Mass. There's a lot of kids screaming in a very small area. And it was just kind of like, yeah. And when I see people now who get really angry, instead of being immediately upset and like frustrated, and I want to like smack them with some really righteous tone where it's like, well, Christ is forgiving you, or, like anything like that, where you feel like you're winning, but you're probably not. Like, this is the voice of an angel, and that's love. And you should love them unconditionally. And that's hard as an adult, because people hurt other people, and we're full of a world of people who don't want to love. They just want to take. And that gets really difficult. And, so with the holidays, again, bring this back to raising kids. I love the holidays. Like, it smells like Christmas in the air where I live right now. It's got like that cold, crisp smell. It's got like the pine smell to it. It's beautiful. And my son already knows that he needs to start filtering through his bag of toys to figure out what he's going to start donating to the kids who don't have anything, because he knows that at Christmas time he gets presents. Right. And the deal in our house, it's one present in, one present out, right? And it's not because I hate my kids and I don't want them to have toys, but I want them to understand that when they have an excess, they should give from their need, not their excess. So go back to the gospel that you were talking about at the very beginning of this. The woman in the gospel didn't give from her excess. She gave from her need.
Right.
She only gave 1 penny because that's all she had. And I look at my kids, and my kids have a lot of stuff because my wife and I have been very successful and blessed. And my kids have a lot of stuff. And I look at my kids and it's like, what are you going to give from the things that you have? Before you even get new presents, it's not like, you have 10 on Christmas Eve and you have 20 on Christmas morning, and then you give 10 from there. My kids give from what they have before they get more. And it builds this self-penitential, sacrificial essence to them, where they're constantly looking to give to people from all that they have, not knowing what they're going to get.
Right.
And I think that's, if I died tonight at this very moment, that would be the gift that I gave to my kids that has a lasting impact in their lives, is that my kids have understood how to give from their need and their want, not their excess. And I still have a hard time with that now because, as a parent, you have $20 in your pocket. You're like, my kid's got to eat. And there's a homeless kid who probably hasn't eaten in 2 or 3 days. And you're like, I should probably give that to, the homeless kid, and I'll go without my meal. My kids are obviously my first priority, but my want to eat is not surpassed by that other person's need to eat. And so, I think that's been the most difficult to convey to them, but it's going to be the one thing that lasts probably into the next generation of kids in our family, which, if that's the impact that I made in the world, then, like I said, I'm happy dying today, and that's the impact I made.
Right on, man. And for anyone out there listening who might have misconstrued that as sort of some cockamamie liberation theology / socialism, just because he was talking about giving. No, that's called being Catholic. That's called being pro-life, not just at birth, but all throughout life. There's nothing, and the only reason I bring this up, people online entertain the heck out of me. This person was chastising pro-lifers for only remembering the birth part, but not the rest of the life part, which I don't know that there's that much truth into that, considering what we've just discussed is taking care of each other. But there's that perception. And then, at the same time here in the United States with, oddly enough, socialism, rearing its ugly head, I don't understand. Maybe I don't want to understand, but I'm just going to say that I don't understand how that's possible in the United States. And it's not necessarily just a political discussion, but in the Catholic Church, if you read all the way to Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, and not just that, but from centuries and centuries onwards, you can see in the Acts of the Apostles the universal destination of goods, meaning that private property doesn't take primacy of place. Going back to what you were talking about from giving from your need, not just your excess. That's a great example to show our kids, because at the end of the day, the difference between what you said and what, Ocasio-Cortez is saying is that you're doing it from a personal compulsion, from your own free will, motivated by your faith, rather than some power that be outside, especially outside of your faith, dictating how much you should give. Imagine how much easier and how much better this world would be if we followed that precise example of, hey, my brother and sister in Christ over there is suffering. I have something that can alleviate their suffering. I'm going to give them this thing that can help alleviate their temporal suffering. And in so doing, hopefully that'll lead them to Christ and his church. That is how it's supposed to work. Not that person's suffering, what's the government going to do about it? It's what are you going to do about it? And these are the great things that just like you said, that's a great lesson to pass on to the kids. I'm going to have to make a more deliberate effort of making sure that I underscore that with my kids, because just like I brought up and that you highlighted and punched home. Yeah, you don't give out of the things that you aren't gonna feel. Give from the things that you are gonna feel from your whole life. Because I gotta tell you, man, when you were saying that you have a lot of stuff, I'm standing in my room right now, my personal tools and hunting room, and I'm staring at I'm turning around and I'm staring at 8 bows. I can't shoot right now because my shoulder's still jacked and I have at least 4 more months of physical therapy. But 2, I can only shoot 1 bow at a time. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of archery equipment, a lot of firearms. I don't know that I need that many. And it's so hard to balance because my kids, they're growing up. I'm more well off than my parents were because my parents did a great enough job with me. And so when my kid was like, "Hey, did you have an iPad when you were a kid?" I was like, "No."
That wasn't even an idea.
I didn't have a cell phone until after college. But I did have other things, probably a lot cooler than an iPad. It's called a soccer ball and a football and boxing gloves, which they also have. But this collection of stuff, it's I don't know. It's probably one of those things that I need to model to my kids. It's like, I'm going to sell more of my bows. I need probably 1 target bow, 1 hunting bow, 1 backup, and that should be it. And then next thing I know, I'm like, no, I think I need a bow fishing bow. And I need a backup to that bow fishing. Dag nabbit, I'm back to 8 bows. So I don't know, man. That's a good one. That's going to be my personal Lent.
I think the beautiful part to that is the thinking of it, right? Because I mean, I'm the same. I'm a big gun guy. I'm a huge gun guy. I'm looking. So again, you're in your man room. I'm in my man room. I have a 4 foot by 3 foot by 8 foot, industrial steel shelving unit packed full of ammo, magazines, and gun parts. And it's like, well, I've got my gun. I've got my kid's gun. I've got the spare gun for my kid and my spare gun. And well, this is my within 10 meters gun. And this is my post 10 meters gun. And this is my Thursday gun and my Saturday gun. What if it's Saturday with the rain? But if it's Saturday with the sun, I've got this one because it's like a convertible. So, I mean, it's all of that stuff. But then you're thinking about it. And I think that's the beautiful thing is you're thinking about what can I sacrifice? And that's the important thing. A lot of us don't even take the time to think about what it is that we can sacrifice. And to kind of touch back on what you were saying about socialism, I'm not a huge Catholic celebrity fan, but Timothy Gordon, who does that show TNT with Marshall, he talks about subsidiarity.
Yep.
And that concept is so lost on so many people. I hate socialism, but I love sharing. Because I am more able to, I am more intelligent with, and I am more capable of sharing my goods with my community than the government is. So I had a client a long time ago, and I was mockingly kind of saying, if Bernie Sanders gets elected, I'm going to close my business because I don't want to be mandated into sharing where and how. And if I had lower taxes, that would be great. And they were like, well, don't you care about homeless people? If there was more taxes, we'd be able to give more money to the homeless. And I was like, no, because if I'm taxed $100, $98 is going to go to administrative fees and salaries. $2 are going to go to the homeless. I was like, if I wasn't taxed at $100, $101 is going to go to the homeless. And they were like, you're telling me that if you were taxed less, every one of those pennies would go to a homeless person? I was like, well, I'd tell you, more of it would go to a homeless person because I love to give what I have. I worked my butt off to have enough to give to other people because I can give to people in my community. And, so again, I don't like how my diocese spends its money, and we've had some financial issues. So instead of us giving to all of these second and third collections, we give to the first collection because it's important to keep the doors and the lights on. But when it comes to feeding the homeless, instead of me giving $20 to the diocese to get spent $14 of it goes to, the homeless, and maybe $6 goes to lawsuits and administrative fees. I'm going to go and I'm going to spend $30 in canned goods, and I'm going to go give it to the homeless, because I am better capable and I am better at doing it than anybody else is, because there's always that bureaucratic cloud of, money disappearing. And people just don't understand that. I don't need 6 rifles. I need 3 or 4 maybe. So I can go sell one. And the money from that I can go give to the homeless, or I can go buy, some cool stuff to give away, or I can, treat somebody to a great meal. I love doing that all the time. I did it the other day. I went and got donuts. It was on Friday. I went and bought donuts for my daughters. And the guy in front of me, his card reader wasn't working. Something was wrong with his ATM card. And he was going to go to the ATM, and I just looked at him and I was like, I'll just get your donuts. It's a dozen donuts. It cost me $9. I'm not going to die. So I bought him, and he's like, no. He goes, I have the money. And I looked at him and I was like, it's not about the money. I'm like, I believe you that you have the money. He goes, no, seriously. He's like, I got money. I was like, I didn't think that you didn't have money. I just want to give you something. I'm giving you the gift of donuts. Go have diabetes. Enjoy.
Nom, nom.
Seriously. But it was the look on his face was so kind of shocked and bewildered. And I had my kids with me, and it was one of these great teaching moments. I just bought the guy donuts for no reason. It wasn't like the guy looked like he needed donuts. He definitely didn't need donuts. I can tell you that from the way that he looked. He did not need a donut. But he was trying to get something and he couldn't get it. And I was just there, and the Spirit spoke to me, and I bought the guy a dozen donuts. Not a big deal. No sweat off my back. It literally it's not a lot of money. And my kids were kind of like, well, why did that guy not, why couldn't he buy his donuts? And I was like, he probably could buy his donuts. And they're like, well, why did you buy him donuts? Because I wanted to be nice.
Yep.
I wanted to be nice to him. And whether or not, that whole pay it forward bit, he's going to go buy somebody donuts the next time, or he's going to go buy somebody that stuff doesn't matter to me, because that's me trying to almost buy that goodness. I just wanted to be nice to a guy, and I was capable of doing it. I was able to do it, and I did it. And so many of us get so stuck in this, well, I want to do it, but maybe I can't. It's you would just do it. It's not a lot of cash. Just go be nice. Being nice feels so good. It does. It feels so great. And the great thing about it is that it was voluntary. I wasn't forced. Nobody shamed me into it. They're like, this guy can't afford those donuts. Maybe you should pick up the weight there. Scrooge McDuck money bins. No. I had a 20 in my pocket, and it covered his donuts and mine. Cough up the money. Not a big deal. That guy's going to go have a good day. I'm going to have a good day. And my kids got to see charity lived out in action. And I think sometimes as a parent, we forget that. It's not the big things. Again, going back to what I was saying about church, it's not the things that you say. It's not the things that they hear. It's not the things that they see. It's the things that they feel. And I want my kids to feel at home in church, and I want my kids to feel the joy and love, that warmth in their heart. That's Christ giving them a hug when they've done something good. And that's power that you can't take away. And it's a moment in time that they'll remember forever. And I mean, I've got times, I turned 32 on Sunday. I remember a time.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you. I remember I was 5 years old. I was standing in line at a Safeway. And I'm with my mom, and it was the first time I remember crying. There was an old man in front of us, and he looked really poor. And as the cashier is bringing up the food, he's pulling things off of the back of the conveyor belt because he knows he can't afford it. And I remember crying because it was the first time that I had experienced a poor person. I understood that there were poor people, but I was lucky enough to live in an environment that I didn't encounter, that. My parents weren't poor. I wasn't poor. We were very well off. That was great. But watching that man, it was the first time that I'd seen a poor person living their life out in person. And I remember the only thing I wanted to do as a little kid is I wanted to reach into my wallet and take out money that I didn't have and give it to him so that he could have, whatever, his box of Cheerios and his milk or whatever. And that feeling of despair that I had as a kid, I was able to give the opposite of it to my kids when I bought that guy donuts. Instead of my kids seeing a guy walk away without something that they wanted, my kids got to walk away seeing somebody else happy because somebody else did a selfless act of charity. And as Catholics, that's what we're called to do. And that's how we're called to raise our kids. And sometimes we just get lost in it because sometimes it's kind of like, well, why didn't that guy's ATM card work? Like, what was he spending his money? Was it cigarettes? Was it booze? Like, what was he spending his cash on? I mean, this guy shouldn't even be buying donuts anyway. He's super fat. Like that's sometimes like, that's our first reaction. We're like, Brogy, why are you in the store trying to buy stuff? Maybe you shouldn't spend all your cash on, Netflix and, chill. But instead, that's our visceral reaction because we get so jaded in this culture that's all about consumerism that we forget about charity. And simple acts of charity go a long way. And again, in the hearts and minds of our children, it goes even further because it gives them a feeling that they can take and they'll remember that feeling far more. Like my kids will never remember the donut thing ever. Like I doubt they'll remember that, but I guarantee you they'll know the feeling of Christ giving them a hug because they were charitable to others. So
yeah, and going back to St. Teresa's, still technically her feast day for both our time zones. It's those little things. Like some people are like, it might be, that was a box of donuts, big whoop. No, it's not. It is a big whoop. It's the little things. It's the little things given with great love that matter a lot. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that should be, should be setting as examples. It doesn't have to be like, oh yeah, you gave him $100. Well, why not $1,000? Why not half your bank account? Why not? Like people can play that game all day long, but what matters most is that you gave from a great place, and you did it with a great reason, and the guy might remember that, and he might actually pay it for it. Next thing you know, he might run into you again, and whatever it is, he might be thinking, I want what he's having. Whatever love and joy is in his life, I want that. And next thing you know, he might tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey man, that was really great. I want to return the favor. And not only that, why did you? And then you can explain why you did it. And next thing you know, his big old butt might be in church. I don't know. Maybe he's already in church. Beats me. But the point is, like, that's the kind of stuff that we should be setting for our kids. And I'm going to throw a curveball at you because it's still with the kids. So, different topic. So break. This one is about the birds and the bees. So my daughter is 11 years old, and I've been contemplating for the longest time how to do this because I knew that it was time was going to catch up at some point. And I love theology of the body. So I did a lot of homework. I thought I was prepared up until I chickened out and I let my wife do it because I was like, well, you have the lady parts. I don't know how to explain the lady parts nearly as good as you. And so she did she did that part. And then my daughter was mortified. She's just like, that's gross. Like because she asked where babies came from. And so my wife gave her an answer, and I as the dutiful husband and father was like, that's exactly how it happens, actually. So yeah, and she's like, that's gross.
Just stand there and nod your head.
And I'm like, the fact that you're saying that's gross, stay with that. However, know that it's also a beautiful thing because that's how you were created. I was created, and it's a gift from God. But I like that. I like that sentiment of that's gross. Hold on to that for as long as you can, please. And but man, I still don't feel like even talking about it right now. I'm still stuttering over words because of I feel like I'm dredging up the feelings that came along with it, of that sheer discomfort. Because for me, my father, how I learned about the birds and the bees, I was in the 4th grade. He popped in a VHF of Porky's. I don't know if you've ever... So,
I got a book called It's Perfectly Natural.
Oh, so Porky's was pretty much a skin flick from the 1970s. I'm not kidding. My father, like, I remember this clear as day, because he's like, well, here you go. And after the movie was ended, I told my father, so when am I going to get laid? Like, because that's what they were saying in the movie. And my father was like, it'll happen at some point. You're still too young. And then my mother heard it, and she gave me a science book to go, that's not how that's supposed to happen. And she gave me the science book that turned the human body into like a machine. And I was like, I'm so confused. I have no idea, between the movie and encyclopedia, I'm not entirely sure what, that talk was supposed, or lack thereof of talking, was supposed to be about. So I figured I'd throw that one at you, because, man, it's still an uncomfortable thing for me.
So here's my thing. So, like, my parents threw the book It's Perfectly Natural at me, which shows, a guy with a regular erection, a sideways one, one that slopes up and one that slopes down. And it's kind of like, it's perfectly natural. It looks different for everybody. And then it goes into like what a lady's parts look like. And then it doesn't show you like graphically what the act is, but it shows like a married couple. I'm assuming they're married because, at the time I only assumed that married couples had sex. But they're like under the sheets, and there's like the vibration lines going on over this bed. And that was my exposure to it until like I got older. And then it was like, I asked my mom, and, like, I don't, quite frankly, I don't care what people think. Like, I asked my mom what a boner was, and she was like, you should ask your grandfather. And I was like, I don't want to ask him. I'm asking you, like, what is it? And like, is there a bone involved in this? Like, do I have like another bone that I didn't know existed that like moves because it, like, I don't get that. And my mom, God bless her heart, told me all of the wrong things. Like, she did the, like, if you kiss, you'll get pregnant. If you touch. Yeah. Like, my mom, I love my mom to death, but my mom was not the person to have had this discussion with me. So like, and this is how stupid I was. I was in sophomore year sex ed class asking if I kissed a girl, would she get pregnant? And the entire class looked at me like I was a Quaker. And they're like, are you kidding me? And I was like, no, yeah, totally. I hope you laughed at that joke. And I like go home and I'm like, Mom, WTF? What is this business? It was so hard. So for me and my family, terminology was always taboo. Like, you didn't call things what they were. They were like hoo-haws and ding-dongs and whistleness. Like, it was always like there was some cool, weird nickname. So with my kids, I've always been like totally upfront with it. Like, that's this, that's that, that's this. Because I don't want my kids to be ashamed of the body that God gave them, which right. A lot of people, and this is the one thing that I think Catholics have gone so traditional on that I kind of want to like roundhouse kick them in the face. Like, a naked body is not sinful intrinsically because it's naked. Yeah. Right? Like, one of the first posts that I did that was really taboo was I took a picture of my back while I was exercising. And it was like all about some verse in Corinthians about strengthening yourself, right? And somebody was like, that's so immodest. And I was like, do you not own any mirrors in your house then? Like, I didn't, like, there was nothing sexual about the post. I wasn't eliciting a sexual response from anybody. I was simply using my body, which was going through a physical transformation because I was exercising, to elicit a visual response to a written verse about exercise. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of us, again, like Catholics, we've gone so far off to the, the side on, the human body where we get so embarrassed by God's creation. You're not allowed to look at it. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to enjoy it. All of that. And you're like, no, I'm sorry. But like, again, theology of the body, like your body is beautiful. It is a creation of God made in his image and likeness. Be proud of it. Don't abuse it, but love it and take care of it. And I think part of that is using the right terminology. And, my wife came in not too long ago. My son, if he ever hears this, he'll probably want to shoot me in my sleep. My wife came into our bedroom one morning, and as every guy's experienced, in the morning, things are much harder than they are when they went to bed.
Yeah.
And he couldn't go pee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was crying because he was really confused. And she was like, I don't know how to deal with this. And I was like, well, I guess this is the time I have to have this intimate moment with my son. Like, all right, come here, bud. Like, get into the shower. I'll turn on the warm water and just kind of like let what happens. Like, just don't worry about it. Like, things are going to go back to normal in a minute, and you're going to go to the bathroom. And he did. And he came out and he asked me about it, and I explained to him that, he had an erection, and that when you have one of those, you can't go pee, and guys get them while they sleep, but it's not a bad thing, and he shouldn't be ashamed of it. Don't go hunting them down, right? But at the same time, like, it's part of the natural course of being a man. And I was like, he's 7 years old, or he's 6 years old, or whatever he was. And it was just like, I was not prepared to give the erection talk to a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And the hardest part, again, like in the Catholic community, the hardest part is like, he uses the grammatical terms for his pieces. He knows he's got testicles. He knows he's got a ball sack. He knows he's got a penis, and he knows what an erection is. And so, like, kids, they always like, sissy foot around the term. And my son's like, oh, you mean whatever. And like, somebody looks at me and they're like, I can't believe he knows that word. It's like, I'm sorry. Are you going to lie to your kids about what God gave them? Like, that's kind of ignorant, because they're going to hear it when they go to school anyway. So like, if you're going to propose an equally authentic and attractive sexual perspective, you're going to need to be able to, one, use the terminology that the secular world is going to use, but two, you're going to have to be as unashamed with your virtue as the secular world is unashamed of their, disvirtue, or whatever the word
vice.
Yeah. Like, they're going to be as unashamed of it as you should be unashamed of your virtue. That's how you combat it. Because otherwise, your kids are going to come home and they're going to be like, why haven't you talked to me about this? And you're going to be like, well, maybe it wasn't the right time to talk about sex, because sex is this. And so, like, my kids know that the word sex leads to babies, and my kids know where babies come from. They know they live in a mommy's belly, and they know whereabouts they come out of a mom. They don't know what sex is. But it's important. Like, you can't lie to your kids. Kids, especially nowadays with the prevalence of technology and information, it's not like when I was a kid, I was going to be able to like go research what a boner was. Like, the internet wasn't even a thing yet. So it's not like you could go on to Google and Google it. Like, Google wasn't even around yet. Like, MS-DOS was the operating system of the most technologically advanced computer that I ever had in my house. So, like, it wasn't around back then. You could kind of get away with it then. Nowadays, we've got to be armed to kind of deal with it. And again, Christopher West, when he's got all of these books on theology of the body, it's so difficult. But sometimes we just got to get honest, and we got to get over, some of the taboo-ness of terminology. Because again, it's just a term. It's not like you're using it in a derogatory fashion. And I think that's, again, like, going back to the meaning of this, like, breasts for guys are beautiful. Breasts for girls are beautiful. But that doesn't mean that you abuse them and their beauty and then make them something that they're not, right? Don't oogle them. Like, if they're on your wife, that's great. And to a child, they're a source of nourishment, but that's not something to be ashamed of. And we can get that through, John Paul's Theology of the Body. It's a beautiful text, and a lot of people don't read it because it's so big and it's so explicit, and sometimes that kind of turns people off. But it's super important. It really is.
Yeah, for me, I was having a hard time for the most part because of all the other questions that I thought would end up popping up, and like I said, it's for me, it's a tough balance. As a father of my daughter, I would actually be quite happy if she became a nun. The only reason, so she's been writing this convent over in St. Louis, and so I'm promoting it. I'm not forcing her to look in that direction. If God calls her, God calls her. That's the rule in the house, is that you be whatever God calls you to be. But at the same time, it's so, talking about being jaded, I know how guys think. I was that guy. Yeah. And so I am not looking forward to when there's a suitor knocking on the door, and I already have it planned out in my head. I'm going to answer the door in some dirty tighty-whities with my shotgun and a beer in my hand, maybe a 40. I don't know. It's going to be, and I told her, I'm going to put on a production, and it's going to be uncomfortable for whoever
Just
you bring
home.
home.
40 hands. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable. He's going to get to, he's, short of the full Monty, he's going to get to see a lot of your pops. And she's like, I don't even understand. It's like, you don't understand now, but you will. And so that's the part in me where I'm like, Lord, give me the patience to not go to jail, or give me the aim to put this kid out of his misery. Because it's so hard. Like with my boys, I know with my boys, I don't want them going conquering the world either. That's not holy and healthy. But it's, for me, for whatever reason, I just have a different sort of protective urge for my little girl, to where, it's just so different and weird. I don't know how to explain it. I've thought about it, and I've tried to be impartial, because I love, if my kids ever listen to this, I love each and every one of you equally. You guys are all my kids. But for whatever reason, for your older sister, I feel like I have to protect her a little bit more than I do, my boys. Like I don't know. It's weird.
So like to touch off that, I think that's the beauty of being Catholic, right? Like I think there is a natural call to the specialness of men that's different than the specialness of women, and each is called to a different need, right? Like with my son, I told my wife and I came to an agreement, especially early in life. My kids had to do two physical activities, swimming and karate. My kids need to not drown in water and not get their butt kicked in a fist fight. All of my kids, boy or girl.
Right.
With my son, I am less attentive to him in social settings, because if he gets punched in the face, he probably deserved it. If my daughter gets punched in the face, I'm going to start showing everybody how many guns and ammo I have, because that's not okay with me. Although my daughter probably deserved it, because my daughter starts more fist fights than my son does. But it's different because she's a girl and my son's not. But that's the beauty of the difference in the natural desires of men and women. And it's so beautiful. And everybody's like, no, it should be the same for everybody. It's like, but it's not, though.
No,
because
it's
if
not.
I cold cock a chick in the street, everybody's going to look at me like I'm some evil monster. If I cold cock a dude in the street, it's not going to be a big deal. Like there's something written, and this is, again, the beauty of Catholic. There is a natural law written on each one of our hearts, and we have to fight against that urge to promulgate the junk that society is preaching to us. You really do. You have to stomach it. You have to swallow it. I said in a post the other day, swallowing the truth is like swallowing like a ball. You feel it balled up in your throat. But it's so unnatural for us to do that. And, like my youngest daughter walks around in a veil 24/7. We have more veils in my house than I think anybody else that I've ever met in my entire life. And not because I've got a lot of kids, but because my daughter goes through them like like they're underwear on a guy in boot camp. It's rancid. Like brown 2 days later. My daughter loves the veil, and, God willing, she'll be called to the religious life. And if that's great, good for me. But, like to you, when you were saying like, I'm going to come to the door with a shotgun and a beer and my undies, I always remembered I was going to draw a big 1 foot wide yellow line at 500 yards around my house, because with iron sights, if you're within that, I can hit you. Like if you're coming to my house, knocking at the door, trying to talk to my daughter, like the game's different. And it like even now it's different. Like when young men interact with my daughters, and I know there's nothing sexual about it. There's nothing romantic about it. But when men interact with my daughter, I'm on a different level of attentiveness than I am when women or men interact with my son. And I think that's just the difference in men and women. But again, it should be that way, because men are built to be tough. Like I said this a long time ago and somebody kind of scuffed it off, but I think it's really true. Men are built bigger because they are meant to get hit harder. And women are more delicate because they're not meant to get hit at all. And when it comes to the things that we find as parents that are acceptable with kind of like, like when you grow up, when you get kids, there's a level of pain and suffering that kind of just comes with the territory of being a kid. Some of it is acceptable with my son. Probably not the same thing with my daughter. There are things that I don't want my daughters to experience that I'm totally fine with my son experiencing, because my son is a man and my daughters are women, and it's not okay. And it's not because I'm sexist and I think women are weaker than men. I think women are more special than men. Men can't bring life into this world. Women can. That calls to mind a safeguarding that needs to be protected and nourished. Where, guys are just kind of like clunky cavemen that walk around the world, and, some of us can do great things, but women are each woman has the capacity to bring forth new life, and that's beautiful and sacred, and men don't have that. And I think that beauty of being a woman is unique to being a woman, and that's special. Saint Joseph, my favorite nickname for Joseph is Terror of Demons.
Right.
And I think that's so powerful. Joseph is the coolest character in the Bible. Joseph is the coolest person in the Bible, aside from Christ and Mary, because Joseph is the perfect example of shut up and do what you're told. Joseph, don't divorce her. She's got the baby in her is of the Holy Spirit. And it's like, okay, I won't divorce her. Joseph, get her out of town. Joseph wakes up, gets her out of town. Joseph, get her out of Egypt. Joseph wakes up, gets her out of Egypt. Joseph is the king of zip your mouth and do what you're told. And all of these things that we see in the Bible and scripture of Joseph being commanded to do are all in the mission of protecting a woman and a child. And we should act like that as men, and then treat our women how the Holy Spirit and the angels treat Mary. But we've gotten so far off to the side in our culture where, you have this equality binge where it's like, no, everybody should be equal. It's like, okay, can I hit you in the face then? Well, no, I'm a woman. Like, I don't understand. Like, you could hit me in the face. It's not going to hurt as much because you're a woman and you're smaller. But like, why is it different? Like, it's different. It's written on our hearts and we know it. And it's just the way it is. And, God forbid the first man that comes to the door knocking for one of my daughters, because, you've got some self-control to you. I don't own tidy whities, so he's going to see all of God's creation.
Yeah, man, it's one of those things that I am dreading that day, but she knows. I told her, I was like, look, you live in my house. While you live in my house, you're going to follow my rules, and hopefully it's because you want to follow my rules. It's not that I'm opposed to you exploring whether or not you're called to the married life, but I am going to make sure that you know how far you should explore. And it's as far as spiritual and emotional, mental, but definitely not physical. Because the other thing that I think is an interesting topic is explaining hell. In today's society, I find it, and you were pointing it out, people are either super hot on it or super cold on it. Hell exists. The church teaches hell exists. I don't know that I care how many people are in hell. I just know that more than likely people are there. I don't, aside from the devils, the bad angels. But when push comes to shove, if I can get my kids to understand hell as okay, this is the first line. This is like me telling you there's consequences to your actions. Just like if you step out of line, you're going to get a smack. I believe in corporal punishment. I know some people don't. I do. And so you're going to get a smack. And there's that pain isn't because I hate you. That pain is to teach you that there's going to be consequences to certain actions. Hell is God's way, because like you were saying, it's hard being an adult and think more like children. The good part is we're always going to be God's kids, no matter how old we get. And so hell is God's way of, making sure that we remember that there's an eternal smack coming. But it's like a fixation sometimes where some people are like, yeah, preach hell. But like, remember, you're still you're still able to go there. Don't be like preaching hell to others as if you were safe from it yourself. Some people get really fired up about it as if,
they're not going to go there.
Yeah, and I'm like,
or that they couldn't go there.
Yeah, and I'm like, hold on, slow your roll there, fella, because when push comes to shove, until you get to finish the race, you don't want to celebrate a little too early.
Yeah, it's funny. We just did on our podcast, we did this whole, stint on Marian apparitions. And at Fatima, the Blessed Mother gives the three children a vision of hell. And Lucy says that had it not been for the words of our mother saying that Jacinta, Francisco, and Lucy weren't going to go to hell, she said they would have all died of fright with how terrifying hell was.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, hell is a real place and you can really go there. And people forget that. And sometimes it's, again, the three H words that you don't ever hear from the pulpit are heretic, homosexual, and hell. Everybody that I hear, they're like, we should talk about hell more often. It's like, maybe you should look in the mirror before you tell the priest what to preach about, because some of the things that you're doing might be pulling you that way, and you might not like what you're seeing. It's dangerous. Like it's a reality that a lot of us, even as Catholics, don't want to really admit, because it's so foreign to every experience we have. Some of us have dealt with real pain and suffering and trauma, and we think about those things like living hell, and you're like, no, I'm sorry, but hell doesn't even, like, you can't compute hell. If you were to live out the worst atrocity of mankind on earth, that doesn't even compare to what hell is like. And God being the loving Father, He'll let you make your own choice. But I always love that. If God loves you, why is He going to send you to hell? It's like, no, I'm sorry, buddy, you're marching there on your own.
Yes.
God's not sending you. God is dragging. God is like pulling at you to come back to Him, and you're walking away from Him. Yep. So you send yourself there. Don't blame Him for your actions. So
yeah, and that's the part that's sometimes I think with kids, I have to balance it, because I don't want them being so deathly afraid that everything is so terrifying that they're doing it. It's kind of like the act of contrition. Because I fear the fires of hell. But then the statement that comes after that should be, and normally is, but most of all, because I love you. And, it's most of all because you've offended God. Most of all because you've broken that relationship. It shouldn't be, I don't want to go to hell because it's a terrible place. It should be that, but also more. And like with my kids, I don't want them overreacting, because then you can get, the way I thought about it was when I first came back to the Catholic Church, I was very scrupulous. I would go to like confession once a day as if, life depended on it. And I started looking at God as an evil Santa Claus who was marking down every wrong thing that I was doing and measuring it up to every right thing that I was doing. And that's not how God works. God is a father, but he knows, he knows what you're doing. That part doesn't disappear. It's just not, he's not just there as this unemotional, unloving lawgiver. He's also there, in that sacrament to help you be better. And it's not like, Lord, I said a curse word, please don't send me to hell. Not everything is going to send you to hell. That's the part where not necessarily, those venial sins are good. They're not, absolutely not. But you can't get so scrupulous to where you think, well, if going to confession is good, then maybe I should go once a month. If going once a month is good, maybe I should go once a week. If going once a week is good, maybe I should go once a day. If going once a day is good, I'm just going to drag a priest around with me.
I'm just going to live with one.
Yeah, I'll just go live with a priest because I'm afraid of going to hell because I'm screwing up left and right. Or maybe you think about it a little differently, and instead of just fearing the fires of hell, you turn that holy fear into a much more loving of doing the good than fearing of doing the bad. Because if you can get that initial, kind of like with my kids, you're going to get a smack. They know they're going to get a smack, but eventually they start learning why it's good to be good.
Yeah.
Like I tell them whenever they do something good, oh, that makes me so happy. Thank you so much. Or, and they start realizing, oh, I'm bringing joy to my Father. If people start thinking when you do something good in the eyes of God, you're making your Father happy, then that's a better motivation than a good motivation of not wanting to go to hell. So but man, I tell you what, when I was a kid, I couldn't even look at a crucifix. I remember growing up, we had a giant crucifix in our house, like a life-size crucifix in our house, because my mother, she's very religious. My father, not so much. My mother, super religious. And I thank her all the time for the prayers of not giving up on me. But that crucifix was not like one of those like very clean crucifixes. It was kind of like, if you've ever visited EWTN, there was this like super scarred up, bloody, kind of like Passion of the Christ crucifix. And in my head, that's what I remember. I was scared. I was terrified of even walking past it. I didn't want any part of it because I was afraid of, the suffering that went along with that image. And it was, and for a while I thought, I thought that that's what church was. I was like, and that is, but there's more to it than just mere suffering. And that's a hard thing for kids to grasp, I think.
Yeah. And I think, so again, like talking about how you raise your kids, I think as parents, we have this beautiful opportunity to mirror how God the Father acts in the act of penance in our children's lives, right? So like when it comes to kids, like, everybody who's outside of the faith kind of looks at Catholics and they're like, well, you can screw up whenever you want because you can just go to confession and be, forgiven for your sins and then just go back out doing it. It's like, well, that's not how it works. But the one thing that I think is so beautiful about it is like you go to confession, you confess the sins. You're like, God, I've screwed up. This is how I've screwed up. This is how many times I've done it. And then God gives you a penance. You go out and you're forgiven. It's not like the next time you come into mass, like God's there like angry, waiting for you because he's going to hit you in the face. He's already moved past it. You got your penance. You've been forgiven of the sin, and God is waiting to embrace you again. As a parent, we should be reflecting the exact same mentality and action with our kids. When our kids screw up, they get punished, and that's unbelievibly important. When kids mess up, they have earned a punishment. It's not like you need to delve it out because you're some, oligarchy, D-bag father. kids screw up, and that earns a punishment, a just punishment, one that's proportional, and you give it out to your kid, whether that's corporal punishment, because I don't love hitting my kid, but I don't shy away from smacking my kid when they've messed up, because it's important, because pain is a lot more, memorable than, angry words. But when your kids mess up and you give them a punishment, you go back to being in relationship with them the way that God goes back into being in relationship with you. They mess up, they do their penance, which is the punishment that you dole out as the parent, and then you move past it. And that's the kind of relationship that you should be explaining to your kids when it comes to confession, because a lot of the time some kids, they get, just as you just spoke about, and I remember as a kid, I'm like, how can God forgive me of this sin? Or when God's forgiven me, it's like, how did they actually forgive me? Did he actually forgive me? Or is he just waiting to be angry at me again? As a parent, you forgive your child of the sin because they're flawed, because we're all fallen because of the sins of Adam and Eve. But when we forgive our children after they've done their punishment, we should be able to move past that, just as God does for us. And that's our job. Again, as a father, you are the priest, the prophet, and the king in your own house, and you mirror Christ in your family as Christ does to his church and in the world. Your kids mess up, you punish them, and you move past it. You don't act like some butthurt teenager waiting to passively aggressively beat your kid because you're mad at them because they've done something stupid. Because kids do stupid things. Heck, adults do stupid things all the time.
Yep.
But if we're to mirror Christ in our family, we need to mirror him in the love of the sacraments. And that's not this, kumbaya moment, because some of the sacraments are painful. Confirmation used to be kind of painful because the bishop was supposed to smack you.
Yep. I got
right?
smacked.
And like, God, if I could bring back one thing in the church, it would be that. I would love to see some of these massively effeminate bishops slapping some of these kids. Like you're talking about football players. I used to teach confirmation, and there was one kid who was like 6'13", 395 pounds, solid muscle. All right, I would have loved to have seen my bishop slap that kid just to see the kid look at him. But again, really, Christ forgives you. The moment you ask for penance and you're true and you've got the right heart, Christ forgives you. You're forgiven. You've got a punishment that you've got to live out, and that, sometimes you live that out on earth and sometimes it's in purgatory, but you move past it. And then Christ embraces you in the Eucharist. How often do we do that as parents? Or is it, so-and-so did this and I'm going to be mad at them for like 10 or 12 hours, and your kid's walking around on eggshells. I'm not saying that you're doing it or that I'm doing it, but that's sometimes how we act.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, if we're called to be like Christ in our families and in our homes, we need to act like Christ and use the sacraments as an amazing, checklist. These are the 7 ways that God saw fit to embrace humanity for all time. These are the 7 sacraments that he gave to us. How often do we live those out in our daily lives? And again, penance is, I think, the most important one because it's the one that's done the most. We screw up way more often than we don't. And that's just the nature of humanity. And if we go around being the parent who's like, you know what, you can't tell me you're sorry because you've done this 3 times this week, you POS kid. It's like, they're a kid. I screw up all the time. If not lifting the toilet seat was a sin, I'd be in hell already. So I should be able to forgive my kids for the things that kids do because they're kids. They're fallen. I'm fallen. They're children. They're immature in their very nature. But you forgive them and you move on, just as Christ does in the sacrament, because that's the beauty of the sacrament. And I think that's the beauty that so often is lost. Sometimes we go to confession and we walk around like, oh, I can't, am I worthy of this forgiveness? You know what? Christ allowed himself to be tortured, murdered, and nailed to a tree to forgive each one of our individual sins, not our general sin, not the, theoretical sin of all of humanity. Christ knew each individual sin that every single person was going to commit and had committed, and he still chose to sacrifice himself for each one of them. So you're worthy of forgiveness. and all you have to do is seek it out with the right mind.
And that's the thing too, is like for non-Catholics who are listening, it's not working towards that worthiness. The only work that's being done is working towards humility to be able to accept it. And so you're not earning heaven in that sense. You're working your in fear and trembling your salvation because of you have to exercise humility. That is in and of itself a work, because humility is tough. And that's probably one of the greatest aspects about being a parent. And I know we were talking a lot about teaching our kids, but as I've learned being a parent, I get to learn a lot too. I've matured so much with each kid, like with the years that have passed by of being a parent. Kind of like what you were saying with parenting through the sacraments, parenting through the faith, growing in the faith because of that parenthood, because of being married, being able to look at the faith in a very different and very different vocational sense. And that's huge. And I think that's one of those things that we need to pay a lot more attention to. But anyhow, brother, this is probably the longest podcast that I've ever done. I'm looking at 2 hours and 12 minutes. 2 hours. So, as much as I would love to do this for more, I think maybe we put a dog ear on this one and continue it for a future episode, because this was really fun. And it powered me through, or it'll power me through the rest of my week spiritually. Definitely very grateful to have been on the show. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that we should just live out the sacraments in our daily life as parents and as spiritual heads. And what I wanted to do with you is, I love your podcast, and to all of the people that listen to mine, as cool as I think I am, there is a wealth of knowledge accessible through your podcast. And if you could just kind of let everybody know how to find you, like the best way to get in touch with you, the best way to listen to you, and to consume the knowledge that you give out, how do people find you?
So I'm going to this is going to be with an apology. I've come back on flying status, and so I've not been as regular, but the more frequented aspect is on Instagram, kind of like where I found you, and that's at Catholic Ammo. I have to catch up on publishing some podcasts, and I appreciate all those kind words. And but at Catholic Ammo on both Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think I have a couple of articles out there if you look at those Catholic men. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. Usually I don't get to talk to people with opposing viewpoints. So if the Rob Stargram is listening to this, thank you for being one of the few non-Catholics who've come on the show. But for everybody else, don't be shy. It's just a conversation. It's okay to disagree sometimes. I'll pray for the agreement to come later. But aside from that, I don't know how frequent I'm going to be in the near future, but I will try to be more frequent than I have been in the last couple of weeks.
Perfect. And then you're on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, or?
Yeah. So you have actually a really cool way of doing that, and I had to research how we did it on WCAT radio. So on WCATradio.com, there's the live streaming from there. It's on Spreaker, it's on iTunes, it's on the Google Podcasts, all the other ones that you probably mentioned. I should be more cognizant in trying to promote it. But if you go to iTunes and Google Podcasts, I think that'll probably cover the most of the bases. If not, look up Fire Away and put in Fire Away and Carlos, and you'll be able to find it.
Sweet. All right. Well, given it is October and it is the month of Fatima, I'd love to close with the Fatima prayer. So if you don't have anything else, I'll use your words, any saved rounds?
No, I have nothing, brother. I'm fully spent all the ammo, and this is probably so sorry, Chris, or Christian. This has probably been the most fun podcast that I've done in a while, because this is the only one that's lasted more than an hour. So I'm spent.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, we'll end in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Oh my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
All right, brother. Hey, man, I want to say thank you. You reached out to me a long time ago. We had a discussion about the creation, and I've been thinking about that nonstop since you and I talked about it, and that led to this. So, man, you're killing it out there, and I'm humbled and blessed that you came on here and spent 2 hours with me. So thank you. And thank you for the sacrifice of your time, because you're a family man and you got 4 kids, and I'm sure they're a lot more fun than I am. So thank you.
Thank you too, brother. This has been great. And I think we should definitely do this again, especially if we can get a couple more of the other characters or personalities, if you will. It's good talking to you guys, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.
Awesome. All right, brother. Well, you have a good night, and I will talk to you later.
Sounds good. God bless you.
All right. God bless.
Out here. All right, folks. Thank you for listening to mine and Pierce's episode. Please don't forget to subscribe via iTunes and whatever other platform. We can be found all over the place. For him, it's at Catholic Guardians. And for more thought-provoking, soul-enriching content, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under @CatholicAmmo. Again, that's @CatholicAmmo. And be sure to check out more Fire Away at wcatradio.com/Fire Away. This is your host, Carlos Bersabe. Until next Friday, or whatever day I can squeeze an episode in, keep mission focused and stay locked, loaded, and ready.
Failure is not an option.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think of the lake?
It would take a miracle.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization, and don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.